Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through the history of James Bond, looking at every novel and film in release order, as well as occasionally doing little pit stops to have a look at other media that came out in between. And you join me at Ian Fleming's fourth James Bond novel, Diamonds Are Forever. Casino Royale took place in largely one place before Live and Let Die broadened its horizons somewhat, and then Moonraker was set entirely in England. So along comes Diamonds Are Forever to follow it with another stretching of the legs. But even though it returns globe-trotting to the Bond series, we go back to the United States, which is where we were 2 books ago, and that kind of just makes Bond feel a little bit like a transatlantic yo-yo. However, location hopping is but one element of the James Bond formula, and as long as the caper is different, the villain stands out, and the plot's got its own thing going on, there's really no reason why the series returning to a location it's visited before should feel same old, same old. Indeed, Diamonds Are Forever visits different locations within the United States from Live and Let Die, so it's not like it's really repeating itself. That said, it's all a bit smugly again. And Tiffany Case, like Solitaire, is framed very much like a woman who needs to be rescued, rather than, like Vesper Lynd and Gala Brand, a woman with her own agenda in a very capable role. That's actually a little bit unfair to Tiffany Case, who does emerge as a stronger character than Solitaire, and her backstory does give her quite a bit of steel. She also gives Bond a run for his money in the bantering stakes as well, and while she's not quite as insipid a character as Solitaire, I do feel like she hews slightly more closer to that type than she does to Vesper or Gala. She feels like Solitaire done right, basically, and even though she does sort of sometimes threaten to tip over into being a damsel in distress, she does emerge as one of the book's standout characters. And yet again, in the climax, she is solely responsible for saving Bond's life. In fact, she rescues him. So I'm not in any way here to denigrate Tiffany Case as a character. I'm just pointing out similarities between Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever, even if those similarities aren't exactly the same. And this does finish up as a very different book from Live and Let Die. American setting, smuggling operation and broad type of Bond goal notwithstanding, Diamonds Are Forever does feel like Fleming has wrung enough changes to create a fourth distinct Bond novel. But with these first 4, it does feel a little bit like there's a slight pattern emerging, and you could slot Casino Royale and Moonraker together, and Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever together into 2 types of Bond story. Had Fleming not shaken things up further with his next Bond novel, then James Bond could have fallen into a sort of like rinse and repeat trap going forwards. Because whenever I read Diamonds Are Forever, I always get the feeling that Fleming is a little frustrated. It reads like the last obligation before he has the courage to branch out and truly go for it. And because of that, Diamonds Are Forever always feels a little bit perfunctory. So I said, as long as the caper is different and the villains stand out, then everything should be fine. But in this instance, you get the impression that even Fleming doesn't think much of the villains this time. Bond himself ends up comparing them to the supervillains he's faced before and deciding that they come up short. So in that respect, in that area, even the book ends up selling itself short. They're not an opposing superpower in the Cold War, they're not a foreign intelligence agency, they are simply gangsters who, among other things, smuggle diamonds. As in every story, Bond comes across several villains as he makes his way up the chain. So, if you had to cite a main villain in Diamonds Are Forever, I guess you'd go for Serafimo Spang. Or at least I would. He's one of the leaders of the gang that Bond is up against, and barely in it. When he is in it though, he is far stronger than simply a gangster, to the point where Bond chides himself for underestimating him. So, had Serafimo Spang loomed over the final act of this book more than he does, then it could have finished incredibly strongly. As it is, it does end stronger than it begins anyway, and things pick up considerably when we get to Las Vegas, with the net closing in on around Bond, giving the added feeling of the stakes rising. And even though I do feel that Serafimo Spang exits the story far too quickly, the passages on the boat do generate some tension. The section on the Elizabeth liner also takes time to dwell on Bond having to clean up the scene after having been forced to kill Winton Kid. Now, this is a far more brutal and visceral scene than the flashbang wallop of the film adaptation of it. But to be honest with you, the tone of the film deviates so far from the tone of the book that that's to be expected. Obviously, I will talk more about translations to screen as adaptations when I reach the relevant films, but I do think it's worth mentioning about that scene in the film. Kid's death by skewer, flaming skewer, is horrific, before Wint's death by explosive wedgie is played for laughs. It's such an odd scene. Back to the book though, and even though I do appreciate the scenes on the boat as Bond and Tiffany make their escape from the US, I can't help but feel the lack of a main villain after Serafimo Spang is introduced and dispatched in very quick succession. I think the lack of that main villain does sort of like have a sense of dulling the excitement. Fleming had a tendency to truly loathe his own villains, which came across marvellously in the writing. With one totemic figure for Bond to fix hate on, the relief when said figure is dispatched is palpable. So palpable that you've then got your natural end to the story. So even though Spang does get a death befitting of a Bond villain, the focus on all the henchmen along the way makes Bond's objective feel explicitly about the diamond smuggling affair rather than the man at the end of it. And yeah, his objective is the diamond smuggling ring, but an important part of the Bond formula is always the man that stands at the end of the mission. And because this book lacks that, it does end up feeling like the weakest one so far. Not helped by a really meandering feel before it clicks into focus when we get to Las Vegas. And it's in the final act of the book where we also have a truly excellent lair befitting of a Bond villain. Spectreville is a bona fide rebuilt old Wild West town complete with working train that Spang has made his home. It is a glorious dose of Bond bonkersness that Fleming just sort of like introduces as the most normal thing in the world, which was his talent when it came to crafting supervillains and their schemes. And to have it be also fleeting here comes with a sense of disappointment. More time for Serafimo Spang and his Spectreville to breathe and expand into the story, and he could have been a villain on a par with Le Chiffre, Mr. Big and Drax. As it happens, he fails by a long way to take a place in the pantheon of great Bond villains. Which also means in turn that Diamonds Are Forever falls short in taking its place in the canon as one of the truly great Bond books. Now, your mileage may vary of course, and if it does, please do let me know in the comments below. But beyond very few flashes of inspiration, it really doesn't feel like Fleming's heart is in this one. Which is surprising considering he researched diamond smuggling to such an extent that the following year he released a non-fiction book all about it. Now, maybe in this instance that's the book he truly wanted to write and just felt the obligation to toss off a diamond smuggling centric story with Bond just plonked into it. Whatever the reason, the usually evocative description of Bond's hotels and dinners and drinks just feel quite lacking compared with the other books. At one point, Fleming describes a drink as strong and good. That isn't to say that it's difficult to get through though. Fleming's knack for prose always pretty much guarantees a very easy read, and there is a lot to enjoy here. The attack in the mud baths is written so incredibly well that even sitting in the necessary light with which to read, the room you're in ends up feeling as dark and as humid as the baths themselves. Bond's humanity has gone nowhere either, which means he remains a very grounded guide through all of this madness, which never fails to feel really impressive when you consider what the perception of the James Bond character became. Steeling himself for death always comes with such a complex cocktail of emotions that it never fails to make for heady reading. Yes, he is a professional in this line of work who to some degree expects it, but it never loses the pure adrenaline of fear whenever he thinks he's in his final moments, and that is something that the films never really depict all that well. James Bond, like anybody else, gets scared. That's something that the films lose because I guess it's not something audiences now care to see. And in fact, the only times I can think of it being conveyed very well in the films is Daniel Craig in the torture scene in Casino Royale, and yes, really, George Lazenby when he's sitting next to the ice rink in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So I must stress, my biggest disappointment of the Bond novels so far is not a disappointment overall. In fact, had it been written with more of the customary verve, then it would have easily beaten Live and Let Die, and in the event is only just behind it anyway. There is enough here to make for an entertaining read, and it's a book which starts slowly and builds momentum as it goes on. It also contains yet more insights into Bond's character, and, given what was to follow, it does sort of feel like the last of the first era of James Bond novels. Starting with the next one, the series evolves. Either the attack in the mud baths or Bond and Tiffany's escape from Spectreville. The latter being could easily work as the climax to any James Bond film if they had the balls to set one in a Wild West town. It's not that the villains aren't very good, the ones that we meet are. It's just that not enough care is paid to make any one of them stand out. And the one that had the potential, the most potential to be the big bad, is written in and out far too quickly to make an impact. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this trip to Vegas, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share it around. It'd be great to get as many Bond fans as possible along for the Supermarathon ride. And what do you think of this one? Is it a letdown in terms of the villains after the ones we've met previously? Or do you have a soft spot for the Spangled Mob? Is Fleming's writing a little less enthusiastic than before? Or can you tell no difference whatsoever? And do you also see it as the last of the first era of Bond novels, with From Russia with Love being the beginning of something new? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the most unique Bond novel yet. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, bong the bell, and I'll see you behind the Iron Curtain.